sanctions, military aid, and geopolitical risks. But at its core, this war is about something much more fundamental. It is about whether democracy can defend itself, whether borders in Europe still matter, whether people have the right to choose their own future, and whether fear and violence can once again become accepted instruments of international politics on our continent. Ukraine didn't choose this war, but Ukraine became the front line of a much larger struggle, the struggle over what kind of Europe we will live in the decades ahead. For Ukraine, this is a war of survival. For Europe, it is a defending test of the European security order. For many years after the Cold War, Europe believed that economic interdependence would gradually eliminate large-scale war from the continent. We built institutions, partnerships, trade relations, and legal frameworks under the assumption that stability was irreversible. There was a book very popular in Ukraine, was called At the End of the History, written by Francis Fukuyama, my professor at Stanford University, which supposed that liberal democracy after 1991, after Soviet Union collapsed, would be the format of the relationship of governance around the world. But Russia shattered this illusion. The full-scale invasion of Ukraine was not only an attack on one sovereign nation, it was an attack on the principles upon which modern Europe was built after 1945 and after 1991. Russia is attempting to redraw borders by force, to normalize aggression, to replace international law with spheres of influence, and to convince democratic societies that freedom is too weak, too divided, and too tired to defend itself. This is why the outcome of this war matters far beyond Ukraine. If aggression succeeds in Ukraine, the consequences will not stop at Ukraine's borders. This is what I often say. If Frontline collapses, it does not disappear. It just comes closer to the European borders. Every authoritarian regime in the world is watching very closely. They are studying whether democratic alliances can sustain unity over time, whether societies become exhausted, whether fear eventually overweights principles. At the same time, Ukraine's resistance has already changed Europe. It has transformed the understanding of security across the continent. Today, European security is no longer discussed only in abstract strategic terms. Ukrainians live this reality every single day. We know what it means when electricity infrastructure is deliberately targeted in winter. I think Taras Shevchenko University knows it also, when students have to come and sit in cold rooms without light, or when education is disrupted and students and teachers have to continue the education online for days, for weeks to come. We know what it means also when schools operate underground because children are threatened by missile attacks. Myself, before I came as an ambassador here to Sweden, we had like a diplomatic corps meeting in Ukraine. All Ukrainian ambassadors from the whole world in summer went to Zaporizhia, and we visited one underground school. Zaporizhia is only 30 kilometers from the front line, with 500,000 people still lives in the city, with 50,000 children still continue the education, and they have these underground schools. And you know, when you hear an underground school without windows, as a mother, your heart shrinks. But happy to say that these underground schools are very modern, very, I would say, even cool, better than my school in Zhashkiv, Cherkasky region, where I came from. But nevertheless, we know what it means when cyber warfare, disinformation, drones, sabotage, and energy blackmail become instruments of modern warfare. Ukraine has become unwillingly, but inevitably, a laboratory of the 21st century security challenges. And this experience matters for Europe, for Sweden. Ukraine today possesses one of the most battle-tested armies in Europe. Our military, engineers, tech specialists, energy operators, and civil society actors are developing solutions in real time under conditions that few other societies have experienced since the Second World War. Just yesterday, I was at Saab, and of course, Swedish teachers and Swedish students know very well what Saab is. For Ukrainians, I just want to say that Saab is a company that produce fighter jets, Gripens, something that we very much looking forward to see in our skies to enhance our air defense capabilities. And I met a Ukrainian drone producer. He's only 27 years old. He's one of the founders and owners of this company called Veri. He doesn't have any military education, any defense, also degree in engineering, but they had no choice but to set up the company that would help Ukraine. So he was yesterday there to share his experience with Saab of how it is to produce these technologies that can protect our country today. And his mother, 50 years old, she's med doctor, and she has mobilized in 2024 and now serving in army already for 5th year to come. So just one of those experiences I wanted to share how it looks like. So this experience, this includes drones warfare, electronic warfare, air defense integration, civilian resilience, decentralized energy systems, digital governance under wartime conditions, and rapid military innovation. In many ways, Ukraine is not only defending Europe. Ukraine is helping Europe prepare for the future. And this brings me to an important point. The future European security architecture cannot be built without Ukraine. Not politically, not militarily, and not morally. For decades, security in Europe was often discussed about Ukraine, but without Ukraine at the table. That era is over. Ukraine is not a buffer zone between East and the West. Ukraine is a European democracy defending the very principles of which Europe itself stands for. And despite everything, despite daily attacks, destruction, and enormous human loss, Ukraine remains democratic. We continue to hold political debates, independent journalism exists, civil society remain active and vocal. Our institutions continue functioning under wartime conditions that would challenge any democracy in the world. This resilience is not accidental. It reflects something important about Ukrainian society. Ukrainians do not simply fight for territory. Ukrainians fight for dignity and freedom and the right to determine our own future. And this is why international support matters so much. Military support helps us defend our skies and our people. Economic support helps sustain the functioning of society. And political support sends a signal that Europe will not allow force to determine the future of the continent. But support for Ukraine should not be understood as charity as well. This is what I'm saying whenever I speak here in Sweden. I ask partners not to see us as a charity case, but to see it as a strategic partner on the front line. We believe that this support coming from Europe is a strategic investment in European stability and security. Every air defense system protecting Ukrainian cities also protect the credibility of Europe's security commitments. Every sanction package weakens the ability of authoritarian regimes to finance aggression. Every long-term partnership strengthens the democratic resilience of our continent. And let me also say this clearly, unity matters. One of Russia's strategic objectives has always been to divide democratic societies. We can see that of how they work, I don't know, with Hungary, I'll mention, of course, not after the latest elections, but nevertheless, Slovakia many other countries, not in Europe, not here in Europe, but around the world. And they work to create fatigue, polarization, cynicism, and distrust. This is why disinformation campaigns target not only Ukraine, but European democracies themselves. And the goal is simple: to convince free societies that defending freedom is too costly. But history teaches us something else. The cost of stopping aggression is always lower than the cost of ignoring it. Europe learned this lesson in the 20th century at a devastating price. Today, we have a chance to act differently. The good news is that Europe has already demonstrated extraordinary unity and leadership. Countries like Sweden have shown that what principled leadership looks like through military support, humanitarian assistance, political solidarity, and long-term strategic cooperation with Ukraine. I'm very proud to be Ukrainian ambassador here in Sweden, but I'm also very proud to be ambassador in Sweden, because Sweden is only 10 million people, but when it comes to military support, it's number 3 in the world. When it comes to energy support this winter, I'm proud to say that it's number 2 in the world in terms of how much support you provide. When it comes to demonstrations, it's probably number 1 in the world. Only here in Stockholm, I know that it's on Sundays, Mondays, and Wednesdays when Swedes conduct the demonstrations weekly since 2022. And I've learned as an ambassador when I came here 8 months ago. And it is, well, surprising probably, but also admirable, I would say. And this solidarity matters deeply to Ukrainians, not only because it helps us survive, but because it reminds us that we are not alone. And perhaps most importantly, it demonstrates that democratic societies are still capable of courage, long-term thinking, and moral clarity. Dear friends, the future European security order is being shaped right now, not in theoretical documents alone, but on the battlefield, in energy systems, in cyber defense centers, in democratic institutions, and in the resilience of societies under pressure. Ukraine is paying an enormous price in this struggle, but Ukraine also believes in Europe. We believe that democracy remains worth defending. We believe that freedom is stronger than fear. And we believe that a secure and peaceful Europe is only possible when aggression fails. One day, this war will end. And when it does, Europe will face an important question. Will we simply try to restore the old security order? Or will we build a stronger, more resilient Europe, capable of defending itself and its values in a far more dangerous world, unfortunately? Ukraine wants to be part of building that future, not as a victim of history, but as a contributor to Europe's security, resilience, innovation, and democratic strength. Because today Ukraine stands at front line of Europe. But ultimately, what is being defended there belongs to all of us. And, sometimes people in Sweden ask me, Svitlana, how is that possible that you still have the strength to fight this war in its 5th year? And I say, because of 3 things. First of all, because of our people, because of Ukrainians. Yes, Putin has more weapons, but we have more values. Secondly, because we have purpose. He came to grab the territory. We are not fighting for the territory. We are fighting for our history and our memory, whether it's in Crimea or in Donbass. We also fight for our future, for the playgrounds where our children play. And also we fight because we have friends and partners like Sweden. We fight because you are fighting with us. You are standing with us. So I would like to also use this opportunity to say to Sweden, tack så mycket for your support. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. Thank you.
Svitlana, thank you very much for your speech. If you don't mind, we've got a question to you.
Of course. Happy
Yes,
to.
please. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Henrik Herr from Länsstyrelsen in Jämtland, the regional government in an oblast in northern Sweden. I have a question about the EU membership, the weight of EU membership. Let's say we have a situation in a few years where the war has ended and favorably for Ukraine, but for some reason you are not members of the EU. Do you think in that situation you would inevitably drift back into the Russian orbit? Or would Ukraine be able to stand on its own outside of Russia and outside of the EU?
Thank you for this question. Well, first of all, you know, you have to understand that this war affected every single family in Ukraine. Our relatives, brothers, sons, parents are either fighting or friends fighting, and lots of houses have been damaged. Every one of us in Ukraine have witnesses of how missiles or drones would land next to your house, where you could see it from your own window, whether it's on a church, on a hospital, on a school that you've been to, in a park that you walked to. So after that experience, it's it's impossible to imagine that we could have been somehow again to become the so-called the backyard of legitimate interest of Russians. That is simply impossible. Moreover, I have to say, you know, there is a lot of speculation about Russian language and how, for that matter, Russian language is part of Ukrainian identity. In the beginning of the war, because Russians came from of course, there is a very big front line, 1,200 kilometers of the front line in the east of our country, right? So first people who came to defend our countries were from Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, Dnipro, you name it. And 70% of those people who mobilized in 2022, they were Russian speaking. So we say that Ukrainian war, Russia's war in Ukraine, killed more Russian speaking people than ever before, and you have to take it in your consideration. Also, a personal story. Myself, my grandma is Russian. She's from Smolensk. She was speaking Russian all her life. My mother used to be a teacher of Russian language. But this war is not about Russian language. This is an existential war of identity and about the choices whether we want to live in an authoritarian regime or democracy. And I think Ukrainians proved already through a number of historic events. First of all, Orange Revolution in 2004, Euromaidan in 2014, when our authoritarian president, former president, wanted to bring us closer back into the make Ukraine a satellite of Russian influence, and it didn't work out. All this war is about Ukrainians want to choose their future, and they chose it, and it's European future. Now, coming closer about the European membership, I would say that the situation you describe is not an option. We chose, and we will be the members of EU. And these processes are happening as we speak. Only yesterday night, I have some negotiations with the representatives of Swedish government. And we were discussing how we proceed with opening the technical first and, well, all 6 clusters, the chapters of the negotiations for Ukraine to become a member. And my Swedish counterpart said, we have to open them already this summer, before Cyprus presidency in EU finishes. So that is the plan. And I think that Ukraine's European membership, well, it matters for Ukraine because it's not only an economic possibilities for Ukraine. It's a very important security integral part for integral element of our security infrastructure. But I think that Ukraine's membership in EU matters for EU itself. For a number of reasons. First of all, Ukraine is the strongest army in the world today, I believe, and we will be a very strong contributor to your defense infrastructure, as I mentioned in my lecture, but also we will become the biggest case for rebuilding in Europe after World War II, after Marshall Plan, and it will be a big economic factor, growth factor for the whole European continent. So at the moment, Ukraine and our partners in EU are working very hard to make sure that Ukraine will become the member of EU in the nearest future. Sorry, I'm answering a little bit too long. I'll try to be shorter.
Thank you very much. Any more questions from our floor? No more questions from Ukraine.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. Very interesting and super inspiring keynote speech. Thank you for participating today. Let's see if the Swedish side has any questions. Yes, just a second.
Ambassador, thank you. Maybe just two questions. One, in the final analysis, Europe will have to live with Russia. So I'm trying to say that once there is peace, once Ukraine is a member state of the European Union, how do you project the future? Because Europe will always be bordering Russia. So we need to learn, we need to look at how we're going to live with Russia. And then secondly, quite often we see there are issues regarding corruption in Ukraine. From the highest level, how is the Ukrainian society, how is the Ukrainian government addressing these corruption challenges that are frequently come to the fore?
Thank you for your question. First of all, about Russia is a neighbor and how we learn to live with it. There are, I think, two important aspects to consider. First of all, what kind of Russia do we want as a neighbor? Do we want an authoritarian regime? Do we want to reconcile that there's an authoritarian regime and we come back to business as usual? Or we want to put a pressure on this regime to help them to fail as a regime, to help also Russia maybe to look into the future where democracy is possible. But it's not going to happen if we'll just continue to, well, if we come back to business of Israel, that would be not possible. I think that would be possible if we make it very clear for Russians elites, for Russians law enforcement bodies, for Russian political circle, that authoritarian regime will be not welcomed, that authoritarian regime cannot have normal relationship with the rest of the democratic world, that they cannot do business in Europe and they cannot send their investments in a quiet base of Paris, Monaco, and you name it, that they cannot simply send their children study at the best universities at the expenses of deaths and lives of Ukrainians or other neighbors, or their own, if you want, political opposition, journalists, human rights defenders. I think that's what we have to achieve, to make sure that Russian regime will fail. And I think in order to do that, we have to be very serious about our own defense and deterrence. We have to show Russia, the best way to show Russia that Europe will not fail and Russia cannot invade Europe is that we have a deterrence and defense. You have a deterrence defense with very strong teeth, with the teeth that would be not broken but by Russia. We have to show that the price of a potential further invasion of Russia is so high that Putin will never dare to invade. And that's what I think is Sweden doing very well. You have this concept of total defense, the doctrine that basically assumes that it's not an army which fight, but the society fights and in war, right? So you not only have the Ministry of Defense like we do, but you have a Ministry of Civil Defense, where you get prepared on the level of all other civil institutions to be ready for a potential war. So I think by investing into the defense system, into the defense infrastructure, you're making sure that you will sustain a potential invasion, and it means that Russia does not have a chance to extend its influence. So that's how I think is the neighborhood will be defined for years to come, or maybe decades to come, to be honest, before authoritarian regime in Russia fails. And when it fails, it's another stage when we can think about a different type of relationship. And second question about corruption. I think that what changed in Ukraine dramatically is that before 2014, you didn't hear about corruption in Ukraine, like in Russia. One country that we don't have corruption is Russia, because they never, there is no investigations about it. There is no publicity about it. What changed in Ukraine after 2014 revolution of dignity, I'm sorry, and that we managed to build these very strong anti-corruption institutions. Myself, my background, I was a politician. I was member of parliament since from 2014 until 2019, and I was the co-author of number of anti-corruption policies in Ukraine. I'm very proud of that, because these anti-corruption institutions today, they send a message to the political elites that corruption at any level will not be tolerated. Therefore, only in parliament we have corruption. That's right. This is a disease of, if you want, a country in a transformation, of a young country that is just building its democratic institutions. But at the same time, we have up to around 30 cases of anti-corruption investigations against members of parliament. Just yesterday, there was, I think, indictment announced to the former chief of staff to the president, what does it tell you? That there are no untouchable people in Ukraine, that any case of corruption will be investigated and prosecuted. And that is the best message that we can send and we can demonstrate to our partners and our friends in Europe, that none of the corruption will be tolerated, and every single corruption will be investigated and prosecuted. It's not that there are no corruption in Europe. Only, I think, a few months ago, former president of France, Nicolas Sarkozy, was imprisoned, for corruption when he was a president. Well, France is in EU and NATO for decades, and they still have that problems. But what's the most important? What's the most important for democratic countries like France, like other European countries? That corruption is investigated and prosecuted. And that's what we are working for in Ukraine hardly.
Thank you so much. Let's see if we have a second question on the Swedish side. Yes, we do. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ambassador, for the very interesting speech. You referred in your speech to the military support and also the economic and financial support that Europe and the European Union in particular, but also individual member states give to Ukraine. How does it look like when it comes to support in relation to negotiations, for instance? Do you also feel that Europe provides unlimited or the same level of support to come to a solution along the lines that Anton Korinevich sketched out yesterday, for instance, an international treaty that fully holds Russia responsible and accountable for what it did and is doing to Ukraine?
Thank you for this question. I think it's when you say negotiations, are you sorry, I'll have to clarify. Is it negotiations on European integration or negotiations, you mean peaceful negotiations that we are talking about?
It is negotiations about some sort of a peace agreement, an international agreement that holds Russia accountable, basically.
Yeah, thank you. Well, you know, the best support when it comes to negotiations is enough fighter jets in our skies, enough raiders to intercept the missiles and Shahids, enough long-range missiles, enough interceptors for Patriot system. That's the best, actually, resources that you can invest into the negotiations. Because what we've learned during these last 4 years, that first time when Russia was really closer to had the appetite to kind of sit at the table and negotiate when they understand that they are losing the initiative, and it was before the war in the Middle East. Unfortunately, the war in Iran shifted that perspective for a number of reasons. As you know very well, oil prices went up, and Russia only this year will benefit with $140 billion, unfortunately, despite the fact that their economy suffered quite a bit recently because of the, first of all, what Ukrainian did with in the rear, with damaging the oil refineries, with the deep strikes, but also with sanctions that EU managed to apply against Russia. And I think that Sweden actually is helping us a lot to expose those vulnerabilities. I read only recently, I think it was a month ago, in Financial Times, a fantastic article when your representatives of the government, of Swedish government, was interviewed about Russian problems, and your intelligence show us that Russia is not that strong. So my point is that Russia will sit at the negotiations table when they will feel that the price of continuing this war is so high that they will have to finally actually find the solution. That's the only way. The negotiations is not happening at the table, really, in the room. They are happening at the battlefield, to be honest. Last few months, we had good news, actually. And I think my president, Volodymyr Zelensky, just recently announced that the Frontline stabilized. And we, last Thursday, we had a very good visit of my Minister of Defense here in Sweden. And Mikhailo Fedorov, the Minister of Defense, he informed your government, your parliament, about good news on the front line, that actually for the first time, Russians losing more people on the front line than they recruit monthly, that also Ukrainians started to deoccupy the territories, that they also, because of the Starlink's problem, it was switched off on the front line for Russians. Their efficiency is much smaller. So this is the best investment that you contribute to our negotiations. That's how I would put it. But of course, I mean, also when it comes to the pure negotiation track at the negotiations table, the approach of democratic partners is, you know it very well, the formula is that Europe will stand with Ukraine as long as it takes, first, and secondly, it's up to Ukraine to define what peace we will conclude, and democratic partners will support it. So that's the formula that we operate with within, together with our partners.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. I think we are out of question on this side as well. So from our behalf, the conference organizers, thank you for participating. It was an honor to have you on board this conference, and I'm quite sure you provided us a lot of energy to fight for democracy in Ukraine and in Europe as a whole. So thank you again for sharing your thoughts this morning.
Thank you so much. Так so mycket. Дуже дякую. Слава Україні.
Героям слава.
Слава.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we go forward. It's time for the next keynote speaker, which is Professor Mykola Trofimenko. He's going to We have a keynote speak on education as a foundation for sustainable peace in Ukraine and Europe. And I think our keynote speaker is on site in Kyiv. So we leave the word and the floor to you. And we're very much welcome to the conference. Thanks for participating.
Dear friends, thank you very much for this invitation. Actually, it's a great honor for me to speak after our ambassador to Sweden. Actually, I just recently visited Sweden to study the experience of adult education, because we are very much studying this issue and want to put the pattern of the Swedish pattern as an example for Ukrainian system of adult education, because we are facing a lot of challenges with our people that need reskilling, upskilling, because we have almost 2 million veterans and a lot of internally displaced persons, millions of people that change their location, their homes, and they want to reintegrate into the new societies. That's why actually we also have Sweden as a great example for us to build up this system. And actually, it's a great opportunity for me to speak about peace through the lens of education, because for Ukraine, this is not an abstract subject. We're speaking about peace in the middle of major war, a moment when the very word peace demands precision. Because peace can be just, it can be merely a pause between attacks. It can be grounded in international law, or it can just cover up the pressure to remain silent. I will not argue that education in times of active war becomes a tool of reconciliation. When a country faces armed aggression, the first condition of peace is the ability to defend yourself, your state, your people, and your right to exist. But education can certainly be the source of a different, longer-lasting capacity, the capacity to prevent new bloody conflicts, to stop societies from sliding back into hatred, imperial myths, and the worship of force. The education system of Ukraine and all our allies are built on the principle of never again. The education system of our adversary has cultivated the decades the idea of we can repeat it. This is not simply a difference between two phrases. It is a difference between two political cultures. One teaches us to remember tragedy so that it is never repeated. The other transforms tragedy into a resource mobilization, a language of threats and a justification for new aggression. Lasting peace does not emerge by itself after a ceasefire. It did not emerge by itself when Europe lay in ruins after the Second World War either. Peace was built through institutions, through international law, through economic interdependence, through a culture of memory, and through honest education. It is education that shapes citizens capable of thinking critically, acting responsibly, recognizing the dignity of others, defending freedom, and understanding the difference between compromise and surrender. Let us look at world history for a moment. Many of the major turning points in human affairs were either caused by wars or followed from them. Empires rose and fell through wars. Borders were redrawn through wars. International law developed in response to wars. Even our modern security institutions were built as answers to catastrophes that humanity failed to prevent in time. Peace was never the natural background condition of human existence. The long period of peace across much of Europe and North America after 1945 should be understood as a historical exception, not a gift from history, but the result of difficult and sometimes painful work. Peace must be achieved, maintained, and protected through rules, institutions, memory, and the daily practice of living together. This is precisely why lasting peace is not the outcome of a single agreement, a single summit, or a single generation of leaders. It is a long social undertaking, and education performs a significant share of that work. Lasting peace begins where a society has the capacity to resolve conflicts without violence, where it can protect human dignity, recognize the rights of others, and at the same time refuse to surrender its own freedom. This is not a naive dream of a world without disagreements. Democratic societies always have conflicts, political, social, economical, and moral. The question is whether they have the tools to prevent those conflicts from becoming destruction. This is where education becomes one of the foundational institutions of peace, because education works in the space where international law has not yet reached, where diplomacy has not yet begun, where economic agreements have not yet been signed. Education works with the human being, with their understanding of themselves, of others, of the state, of justice, and of the limits of what is acceptable. A child first learns to live alongside others, not in negotiations or in court. They learn it in the kindergarten, in the classroom, in the schoolyard, in their relationship with the teacher, with the peers, with the rules. That is where a very basic understanding takes shape, that another person has dignity, that rules exist not to humiliate, but to protect, that force is not the only argument, that truth matters. Later, school adds the language of more complex thinking. History teaches children to see cause and effect, not just heroic myths. Literature provides the experience of another perspective. Civic education explains how rights, institutions, participation, and the responsibility function. Mathematics and the natural science discipline the mind. They teach evidence-based reasoning, verification, and healthy skepticism towards arguments that sound convincing but lacks substance. This may sound very practical. That is because it is. A person who knows how to check facts is less influenced by propaganda. A person who understands history is less easily persuaded by imperial stories about the same people or historical territories. A person who experiences respect at school is more likely to respect others in adult life. Education creates the conditions in which civic maturity becomes possible. And the opposite is equally true. Education reduced to mechanical memorization, fear, a cult of victory, and hatred of the other can be deeply dangerous. It can produce knowledge without conscience, technical skills without ethics, memory without compassion, discipline without freedom. That is how education becomes a factory of loyalty to aggression. This is why we must speak not about education in general, but about truthful, democratic, and high-quality education. Education that is not afraid of difficult questions, that does not replace history with propaganda, that does not cultivate obedience where responsibility is needed. That gives people knowledge and at the same time develops the capacity to use that knowledge without causing harm to others. Russian massive aggression didn't begin on the 24th of February 2022. It was prepared over many years through language, through myths, through textbooks, through television programs, through political cults, through a distorted memory of the Second World War, through contempt for neighboring nations, and through the conviction that the law of force overrides the force of law. A myth always precedes a tank. A lesson taught in school one that explains to young boy why it is supposedly acceptable to destroy someone else's home, always precedes a missile strike that this boy will launch when he grows up. This is precisely why Ukraine's response cannot be only military, diplomatic, or legal. All of those responses are critically necessary, but alongside them, there must be an educational response. We must raise a generation that understands the value of freedom without romanticizing war, a generation that is capable of defending a state without glorifying violence, a generation that remembers its losses without allowing trauma to become the sole content of the future. And when we speak about the long educational trajectory from early childhood through school, from vocational training to the first workplace, it is natural to turn to the stage that works with a person who is already formed, yet still very open. A person who is beginning to make independent decisions, who is choosing a profession, defining their political position, and learning to think not by following instructions, but by taking responsibility. I'm speaking about higher education. The university in a democratic society has never been merely a place for the transfer of knowledge. Yes, it trains doctors, engineers, teachers, lawyers, public administrations, diplomats, and economists, but its deeper function is to teach people to work with complex ideas. And that is precisely what matters for lasting peace. Because where wars often begin where a society loses the capacity for complex thought, where history is replaced by myth, where law is replaced by an executive order, where science is replaced by propaganda, where discussion is replaced by loyalty, where the university no longer asks questions, but only repeats the answers that are permitted. We see this clearly in the case of Russia. The aggression did not emerge from a vacuum. It grew in an environment where academic freedom had been dismantled over decades, where critical thinking had been driven out, where history had been turned into an instrument of state mobilization, and where education had been made part of the vertical of power. When a university stops being a space for free thought, it quickly becomes part of the machinery that justifies the use of force. Ukraine's universities have a different mission. They should be spaces where freedom is not chaos and where responsibility is not compulsion, where a student gains knowledge, makes choices, learns to argue and to make mistakes, to correct course, to work with evidence, to hear a different point of view, and at the same time to stand by their own principles. This is why we attach such importance to individual learning pathways, to academic integrity, to the quality of educational programs, to research, to international mobility, to European integration of higher education, European university alliances, and to strong university communities. Behind each of these priorities lies a fundamental question: what kind of person does the system produce? Does it produce someone who is afraid to go beyond the instructions they have been given? Or does it produce a citizen and a profession who is capable of acting in uncertain conditions, taking responsibility, working with others, defending institutions, and creating new solutions? We need specialists who will rebuild infrastructure, teachers who will work with children who have lived through trauma, lawyers who will deal with war crimes, reparations and European law, engineers, energy professionals, architects, psychologists, administrators, researchers, security experts, people who are equipped not only to address the consequences of war, but to build the foundations of future resilience. Universities must become the environment in which that capacity is developed. through student self-governance, through honest assessment, through research, through international partnerships, through joint projects with communities, businesses, governments, and civil societies. Through academic freedom, which is not a privilege of the professor or the researcher, but a condition for the pursuit of truth. And here we return to the theme of peace. Lasting peace is impossible without truth. A society that has no institutions capable of seeking truth becomes easy prey for manipulation. A society that doesn't trust knowledge begins to trust fear. A society that does not have strong science begins to live by political myths. And myths, as our experience has shown us, can be no less dangerous than weapons. Universities are therefore part of the infrastructure of lasting peace, just as courts, parliaments, diplomatic services, media, civil society organizations, and local governments are. They do not sign peace agreements, but they shape the people who will later write laws, conduct negotiations, manage communities, teach in schools, provide medical care, build, research, make decisions, and keep a democratic state functioning. And democracy, let us be honest, does not sustain itself. It must be constantly taught, practiced, explained, and defended. It is tiring, it is slow, it doesn't always offer simple or immediate answers, but it is democracy that gives a society the chance to prevent conflict from becoming violence and to prevent force from becoming the only political language. For Ukraine today, higher education must help the country endure, recover, and not lose its democratic quality in the course of this struggle. Because it is possible to defeat an enemy on the battlefield and still end up with an exhausted, divided, and distrustful society. We must win this war and emerge from it stronger as a political community. This is the point at which education moves out of the category of social services and into the category of national security. Education develops human capital. It supports the economy. It restores people's sense of the future. It gives veterans, internally displaced persons, young people, and adults changing careers a real instrument for returning to active life. It helps society not to remain trapped in trauma, but to transform the experience of war into a responsible political memory. And this brings us to the central conclusion. Peace cannot be taught in a single lesson. You cannot issue a decree on lasting peace and expect society to become resilient automatically. You cannot replace education with the declarations, however well worded. Peace functions only when it enters daily practice, in the way a young child learns to interact with others, in the way a pupil understands history, in the way a student challenges a professor, in the way a scientist tests a hypothesis, in the way a citizen relates to law, to freedom, to dignity, and to responsibility. Lasting Peace is an educational project that spans generations. It doesn't end with victory. After victory, it may well become more demanding still, because then the question will not only be about rebuilding bridges, schools, universities, laboratories, roads, and energy system. It will be about rebuilding trust, about bringing people back, about the reintegration of those who lived under occupation, about supporting veterans, about working with the children who grew up to the sound of air raid sirens, about having honest conversations with those who lost their homes, their loved ones, and their sense of safety. Institutions, communities, international partners, and civil society will all be needed for this. But without education, that work will lack depth. Because education provides the language through which society makes sense of its own experience. We must teach the next generation not only to remember this war, we must teach them to understand why it becomes possible, how the aggressors' politics function, how propaganda prepares the ground for violence, how weak institutions open the door to aggression, how freedom requires not only an emotional commitment, but competence. Education is the foundation of lasting peace, is therefore a governing political and civilizational framework for difficult daily work. Ukraine today is defending not only its own territory. Ukraine is defending the right of Europe and the entire democratic world to believe that law matters, that freedom matters, that education matters. And this is precisely why, when we speak about lasting peace, we must speak about nursery schools and primary schools, about vocational education and universities, about science, about teachers and lecturers, about students and researchers. Because peace doesn't become real when it is proclaimed. It becomes real when a society learns to nurture it through daily, patient, and deliberate work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Dr. Trofimenko, we are extremely grateful for your speech, and we've got some time for several questions. I suggest to do like we have done yesterday. Our friends in Sweden, have you got any questions to the Deputy Minister of Science and Education? Please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Vice Minister. Very interesting speech. Let me see on my side if we have any. Yes, we do. Just a second.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Mr. Vice Minister, for a very interesting speak. I was a bit curious if you could elaborate and expand on the question of course, I understand that the war experience, the current ongoing war is essential, but what do you see as your main challenges, both on the short term and in the long term, to achieve such an education system in Ukraine that you are that you have presented and your ideas for it? So that is my first question about it might be social, structural, cultural challenges, political challenges. Could you expand on that? And my second question is, could you also tell me in what ways do you prepare teachers with skills and competences to be part of shaping such an education system? Thank you.
Thank you very much for these questions. Of course, for us, the biggest challenge is war, and for the Ministry of Education and Science, the hugest challenge is to secure our pupils, our students in the frontline regions, because as our ambassador mentioned, we are building now hundreds of underground schools. We're building shelters at the universities and underground campuses. We invest a lot in the research infrastructure of our universities to foster the research and to keep our researchers and our academia inside the country, because understand that the biggest challenge for Ukraine now is to have these connections with our people that are spread all over the world. We have millions of Ukrainians in Europe, and the challenge for the government is to keep these links. And of course, we wait for these people back, and we want them back because we need to reconstruct, to rebuild our country. And of course, through education, we're trying to keep these links. Actually, I'm from Mariupol, this destroyed city in the first weeks of war. And actually, I was 8 months ago a rector of Mariupol State University. My university is now displaced, and it works from Kyiv. And actually, we have more than 40 displaced universities in Ukraine. And this is a new phenomena when through these universities, Ukraine keeps our people from the now occupied territories in our informational and cultural and other connections with our country. And this is also a huge challenge for our education system, because we have tens of schools that still work online with our pupils that are on the occupied still and that are displaced in other countries. So in all these challenges, we need to keep quality. We need to keep as much offline education as we can. And this is our actually great point to return our pupils and our students to the classrooms, because we believe that the quality education can be reached only through offline or blended education. I visited our frontline regions, the Kharkiv, Sumy, Zaporizhia, Dnipro, and we have great examples of how our education system reacts. And we transform this infrastructure, and we actually in the underground school, parents are convinced and they are sure that their children are in safe while they are studying at school. This is something difficult to explain. And this is everything explains this phenomena of Ukrainian resilience. And the other issue and the other question you asked, this is about our standards. We are changing our main standards of all our educational programs now. And we're preparing the standards of new generation, where we have the competences of defense, of civil defense, of resilience, put into all the programs that we teach at schools and at the universities, because these are the strong parts of Ukrainians, and actually this is what Europeans can study from us. I think that the standards and the new generations of teachers will put these competences in the fundament of all the Ukrainian citizens, and it will be also our input into the future development of our country after the victory. We are very sure about it. I think this is it.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Probably one more question from Sweden.
I do have one if the audience doesn't have one. Okay, I go. No one else? Okay, thank you again, Vice Minister. This is Daniel Selander, Political Science Department at Linnaeus University. I have a question that I thought of at home before I came to the conference, and that is the role of Russian universities to combat Russia's autocracy and Putin's tyranny. From an academic point of view, do you see any chance that Russian universities today could be a small pocket of hope for resistance towards Moscow, or are they totally state-controlled and regulated by the autocracy in Moscow? And a second question is, how do you think Swedish universities, European Union universities, and Ukrainian universities should relate to Russian universities today? Should we, in any shape or form, cooperate with Russian universities to undermine autocracy in Moscow, or are we only supporting the regime if we do collaborate with Russian universities? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We want to believe that they have still some parts of academic freedom and of freedom of all the freedoms, actually. But I have an example from my expertise and my experience. As I mentioned, I was rector of Mariupol State University, and it is now in Kyiv because our academia moved here. And actually, I'm very proud that 95% of our staff and academia remained with Ukraine. And but Russians, after they occupied Mariupol, they tried to very much find me, actually, to put me in charge of the Russian proxy of Mariupol University, and they immediately organized Federal Mariupol University, the only one accepted in the auspices of the Ministry of Education and Science of Russian Federation, the only one on the territory of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic. So they use universities as their propaganda institutions and as their institution to attract young people, to keep them on the occupied, to attract young people from the Russian territories, because they gave some crazy money as a salaries to the academic staff. They gave these scholarships to the students to keep them and to make Mariupol Russian city. Because what is it actually? As the use of universities as an instrument of their aggression. And this is not acceptable. That is why I do believe that we must block all the cooperation with these universities, because they don't have, they are not universities as in European understanding. Unfortunately, I do believe that in some time, something will happen and they will come back to civilized universities in our understanding, European understanding. And I do believe that Ukraine, through European integration, through integration into the European University Alliances, through our partnerships in Erasmus Plus Horizons program, is becoming stronger. And I do believe that in this way, we are making our system stronger. And in this way, our society becomes stronger and the country becomes stronger. And education helps us to bring victory closer. I know that our universities, Ukrainian and Swedish universities, have great collaborations and great projects together. And we are very proud, actually, to have Swedish universities so close to ours. Using this opportunity, thank you very much for this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And if you don't mind, let's ask do we have any questions from Ukrainian side? Please, the first hand.
Mikhail Dushka, Association for International Affairs from Czechia. I would like to start with a personal story of mine, actually. I used to study at Charles University in Prague, and we had one of the obligatory lectures that I had there was on history of Russia. And the thing is that the history of Russia, well, as it is usual, started here in Kyiv. And the lectures, they were basically 100% repeating the Russian narrative of history. And I have a lot of such stories from the university in Prague that, for example, before the First World War, like Kyiv, Odessa, and other Ukrainian cities were considered as a natural part of Russia, whereas, for example, Warsaw, which was also part of Russian Empire, wasn't. So in this regard, I wanted to ask you if you have any strategy how to tackle this spreading of these Russian narratives abroad, or the persistence of those narratives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's actually a very much important issue we're dealing with. And luckily, we do have our First Lady of Ukraine very much engaged in these issues. He is the patron of our project to found Ukrainian studies all over the world at the universities. And we want to split the traditional understanding of us, the framework of Slavic studies or Russian studies, because Ukraine is usually is in these studies together with Russia and very much influenced by imperial understanding of Russia, of history, actually, and from the Russian perspective. And we actually opened a lot of, we have a lot of universities all over the world, from Japan to the United States and through the South America that joined this initiative. And we want the world to know the truth, because it's not our task to use these chairs or these studies as a propaganda, but to bring truth to the people. And I think this initiative, supported by our Ministry of Education and Science and by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, supported by the embassies of Ukraine all over the world, and by the universities all over the world, actually. I think that Taras University is also joined this initiative. So I think little by little we will build up this project, and it will be very much successful. And one of the biggest tasks is to fight Russian propaganda. As you know, they have a huge infrastructure to influence the world and the universities through their humanitarian, through their different Russian World Foundation, and with the billions invested in these issues, because they do believe that through these initiatives they can build some people that will support them all over the world, that will influence their governments. And actually, they proved that sometimes it can be so. And in this way, Ukrainian initiative, of course, it's not so huge in sense of money, but it's very much important. And we are very proud that it is supported by the world universities. So I think that this project will be a good answer to Russian threats.
Thank you very much. We are a little bit out of time. I propose on this stage, we're going to have fika time upcoming for the upcoming 15-20 minutes. So we are extremely grateful for your time, Mr. Deputy Minister of Education and Science. Thanks a lot. And dear colleagues, see you in 15 minutes during the panel works. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Vice Minister.